What's good, YouTube? Today we're going to watch a video called The Evil God Challenge. Somebody recommended this to me. That's what we gonna do. Get your popcorn. Let's get it.
How do we know God is all good and not all evil? This is the challenge that has been raised by Stephen Law, and it's called the Evil God Challenge. Through the cumulative case of various arguments in natural theology, theistic philosophers identify God as a maximally great being, which is to say he has all the properties that are ontologically better.
Omniscient, necessary, when has all the properties that are ontologically beneficial to their maximal extent.
We've demonstrated in previous videos, omniscient.
Okay, the reason why somebody recommended this to me was because I made a video on some of the issues that I personally have when it comes to me personally believing in a deity, and more specifically, some of the epistemic and ontological claims associated with it. And so one of those claims is that it's one thing for somebody to claim that there's a uncaused causer or a creator, right? Well, then it's another thing to claim that the Christian God specifically is the true and only creator. And then it's another thing to claim that based off of that, I guess just based off of that claim, that we ought to act in a certain way according to this specific God's wishes or will. And so it's hard for me to believe in a deity when there is a possibility for all different types of gods or even like a cosmic council. And it just seems like claims about what God is and what he does are unfalsifiable. Now, that's not to That's not to downplay anybody's experience with something that is seemingly spiritual, or if they feel like it was God. I mean, I personally can't explain those types of experiences, but in my experience, I haven't personally had an encounter with something supernatural, at least to the best of my knowledge. But yeah, so that's why somebody recommended me this video, because I was making a claim similar to this, to where it's not that I think that God could even be all evil. It's simply that he could have evil characteristics as well. And it's another, on my part, an unfalsifiable claim as well. But I think it's also equally probable, since God is outside of our comprehension, if that makes sense, or outside of human knowledge and human characteristics. But even then, that brings up problems, because it's if God is outside of human characteristics, if God is outside of human characteristics, well, then maybe he shares some human characteristics while also having its godliness. We're able to tap into justice, but we're not able to encapsulate what true justice looks like, type of situation. Or we're able to tap into components of love, but we don't encompass the fullness of love. Regardless, I still think that is applying human language, human characteristics, and human understanding to something that is supposed to be outside of our understanding, which doesn't really make sense to me. Let's keep it going.
And omnipotence are logically coherent. We've demonstrated in previous videos, omniscience and omnipotence are logically coherent. But how do we know God is maximally good and not maximally evil? This is Stephen Law's Evil God Challenge. As he puts it, the challenge is to explain why the hypothesis that there exists an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-good God should be considered significantly more reasonable than the hypothesis that there exists an omnipotent, omniscient, and all-evil God. Imagine that God is maximally evil. His depravity is without limit. His cruelty knows no bounds. There is no other God or gods, just a supremely wicked being. Call this the evil God hypothesis. Notice this is not an attack on the argument that God exists. Instead, it is a philosophical argument that attempts to show that even if God exists, based on a posteriori arguments, then we can't know whether such a God is maximally good or maximally evil.
Okay.
Well, although it is true from arguments, like the cosmological or teleological argument, that we can't know if that implies a maximally good or maximally evil God, the basic ontology itself of a maximally evil God can be
shown to be logically incoherent. Okay.
First, good and evil can be seen epistemically as opposites, but in a metaphysical sense, evil is simply a lack of or privation of good.
Okay.
Remember, evil is not a thing. Evil is when a conscious being corrupts something that exists in its natural, good state.
But again, like, how are you determining what a naturally good state is? Like, how are you defining this word good? And then but then also, like, how does this correlate to change? Because corrupting is like changing something from one state to another. I'm guessing with a negative context or a negative connotation, I mean. But how does this relate to like positive change? And then on top of that, how do we determine whether a change is good or bad or good or evil? And I feel like that would go based off of a human standard of if it were not prioritizing survival and slash or flourishing. Because outside of that, I don't really know how you're able to define evil or good or have a metric to determine the two. And so if God is maximally good and evil is the privation of good, I'm still failing to understand how that correlates. I might just be just the slowest fucking person in the world, but that still doesn't make sense. But let me just hear him out.
It is an intentional act of the will.
It is an intentional act of the will to misuse something not as it was intended to be used. Okay, but then this is getting a little bit fluffy because then that's assuming that humans have an intended purpose, which would make sense under a God. But if you don't believe in God, then it's like, or specifically the Christian God, because that is a God that assumes humans have a purpose, then of course, like a human could be misused or there could be a natural purpose associated with that human being that could then be corrupted. But for me personally, I take existentialist sentiments. I'm not an existentialist like through and through, but I take existentialist sentiments and think that humans come up with their own purpose, or even the individual comes up with their own purpose. And if my purpose is to enjoy life and, you know, do minimal harm in this life because I only have one, I think that's okay. But then my purpose could also change, you know, like, would I be corrupting myself if I wanted my purpose to benefit even more people or benefit myself slightly more? Not as in like slightly more than others, but slightly more than I did before, because I don't believe that all versions of selfishness are inherently bad. Like, I think that you have to be in some way selfish for you to even promote some type of good. Like, I need my needs met for the most part for me to even care about other people or even care about other things. It doesn't just have to be about other people. If I'm starving to death, like on the brink of death because I'm starving, the only thing I'm going to be worried about is food. I wouldn't really consider that to be like evilly selfish because that's something that is necessary to your survival. I'm kind of just yapping, but I don't know, bro. This is kind of like assuming. This is why I think I have a problem with like evil. Not the problem of evil associated with God, but like this is why I have an issue with prescribing things as evil. Like, I can think things are really bad. Like, I think that sexual assault is really bad. But when it comes to like the word evil, I don't really know what that means. And the way that people use it, I feel like there's just religious connotations to it that aren't expressing exactly what I mean when I say that something is super bad or super wrong. But I can also understand, because I'm thinking out loud here, if evil is the privation of good, I could also see how sexual assault is the privation of good. Because there's nothing good about sexual assault, you know? So I could see that being a good definition in that case. But there's other instances where religious people will often use the word evil, and it's like, I don't see how you're seeing it that way. I don't get that. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I'm just skeptical of certain claims of evil or certain supernatural claims and things like that. But not saying it's not possible. And I'll definitely hear somebody out, but interesting. Okay.
To misuse something. Natural, good state. It is an intentional act of the will to misuse something, not as it was intended to be used. For example, a knife is not evil in and of itself. What is evil is when a person uses it to intentionally harm someone.
But a knife by itself isn't good either. I feel like this has to deal with like potential like agency, if you know what I mean. Or like not agency, but an agent, like a conscious agent. Because I don't think a knife by itself is good or evil. I think it's kind of just neutral. Or even if it's like a knife is used to cut my food, like I don't necessarily think of that as being like a good thing. Like, I guess it can be in a context of like, oh yeah, I need something to cut my food with and it's fulfilling its purpose to cut my food. But I don't know. I would also think using a knife in self-defense would be a good thing, but I don't think that that's what this creator is saying. But just thinking out loud here, bro.
Language is not evil. What is evil is when a person misuses language to lie for a selfish gain. John Milbank puts it like this: evil as privation is not purely and simply nothing. As substance, it may be nothing, but in its effect of removal and deficiency, it engenders a distorted positive act, even though, as positive, that act is not distorted.
Evil as privation is not purely and simply nothing. As substance, it may be nothing, but in its effect of removed and deficiency, meaning that the absence of good, or the effect of the absence of good, removes and creates a deficiency, which distorts a positive act, or potentially like a positive quality.
Some have argued evil cannot be a privation of good from a thought experiment. Picture a scenario where you cause harm to me, and a scenario where you have no interaction with me at all. If evil is the lack of good, then both of these situations should be seen as the same, since in both scenarios there is a complete lack of good. However, intuitively, we know it is better to have no interaction than a situation where one causes harm. So how can evil be a lack of good if in both situations there is a lack of good, but one is intuitively better than the other? The problem with this thought experiment is it assumes good has to be an action performed. The reality is things are good in and of themselves, and evil is simply when a being corrupts or misuses something wrongly.
The problem is good, or things are good inherently. I also like to be careful with like claiming things as inherent, or what's the opposite of inherent? I don't remember, but okay. I think some things are good inherently. What do you think whoever's watching this, what do you think that, what am I trying to say? What do you think is inherently good? Something to think about.
Second scenario, having no interaction with me does not corrupt or misuse me in any way. Leaving things as they are is still good. If we came across a garden, it would still be good by itself, even if we never interacted with it. It would still be good if we decided to tend to it. And it would still...
I don't necessarily know if that's true. Like, these are just my initial thoughts. So it's obviously something that I need to think about more. But like, I just think of things as like morally neutral. A garden is just a garden. Like, it's just there. It's not necessarily like good, regardless of if I'm there or not. Like, it's just there. But am I assuming that goodness needs to have like an output, or needs to have like a beneficial result to a human? Maybe. I might be doing that.
It would be good if we decided to destroy it. What would be evil in this scenario is the act of destroying something that did not belong to us, or destroying someone else's work. It can also be worded as, evil happens when one is deprived of goods, intrinsic or instrumental.
Oh, is that the opposite of intrinsic? Instrumental?
So evil seems to be a privation of good, or in other words, when a conscious being corrupts something that exists in its natural, good state.
Yeah, we're going to need to unpack this natural good state and understand what that means, because this is throwing me for a loop, bro. Because how do we know that something that is existing in its naturally good state is actually good? Like, is it good because it's natural? Because that's not inherently true, but I don't know.
So back to the evil God challenge.
Okay.
The answer simply is that it is impossible to be maximally evil. For evil to
It's impossible to be maximally evil.
exist, there has to be something good for an evil being to corrupt.
Okay.
In reality, evil is simply a bad or selfish intention of the will in order to obtain something good.
That's why I never, well, this isn't why, but it's a good thing, I guess, for my argument. It's a good thing. That I never, in my video that I was making, like, I never said that God is maximally evil. Like, I don't think that that's the thing. What my claim is that how do we know that God isn't just showing face and doesn't have an evil side to him? Because he can show us from the Bible that there are good things in the Bible, and that since the Bible is the inspired word of God, by the way, this is specifically the Christian God, like, he could just be showing that to us. We wouldn't have any way to really verify if this is true because, again, he's outside of our human understanding. But since he's outside of our human understanding, how do we know that there isn't selfish components to God? Now, I guess definitionally speaking, you would have to logically follow if God is defined as God is all good, then he can't be evil. But oftentimes that's not how he's described in practice. Like, I just went to a Christian camp. They were saying that he does these things, like he has an active hand and plays an active role in people's lives. And so, since he's doing, like he has an action of doing good works, how do we also know that he's not setting us up for greater harm in the future? Like, I'm not saying that it's likely, I'm just saying that it's a possibility, something to consider.
Something like power, pleasure, or safety.
Evil is an attempt to obtain power, pleasure, or safety. Like, God is all powerful. God isn't threatened, at least to our knowledge, at least the Christian God isn't threatened by us. So there's no need for him to have safety. So what if this is a God that enjoys partaking or has pleasure in our suffering? Like, say, for example, somebody punches you in the face and then they like patch you up, but then they set you up for greater suffering by stabbing you with a knife. But it's all because of their entertainment and pleasure. What if God has a component like that too? Because technically in this situation, in the hypothetical I gave, it is a good thing that they patched you up, but at the same time, they were just setting you up the whole time for greater torment. And so what if the trials and tribulations that humans go through, like cancer, isn't actually to get you closer to God, but could be this whole time God wanting you to suffer? That doesn't have to be maximally evil. He doesn't have to be maximally evil for you to suffer. He could just be slightly evil. He could have components to him that are complex. There's good parts of him and bad parts of him. And with that comes complexity. And even then, I think that if that was the explanation of God, I'd be more inclined to believe in that than believe in maximally good. And it would also explain the problem of evil, I think, for the most part, if he does truly have components of evil to him, because then he allows suffering. And sometimes he takes pleasure in it. Sometimes he might not take pleasure in it and just want to help people. It's also possible, I think, but it's also unfalsifiable.
However, these things by themselves are not evil.
I'm sure you can come up with a logical chain,
only when someone misuses or corrupts them do they become evil. Bad cannot be bad just for the sake of being bad. One can only be bad for the sake of obtaining what is already good.
Bad cannot be bad just for the sake of being bad. One can only be bad for the sake of attaining what is already good. I'm trying to think of a scenario in which this isn't true. And by the way, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just trying to be truthful. And so I'm trying to determine these claims. That's kind of hard. I feel like morality in determining whether something is good or bad is an a posteriori issue. Because if we're using a secular anthropological lens to observe the history of humans learning what is good and bad has changed significantly throughout time. And so it seems like, I'm not saying that there can't be a priori understandings about morality, but it seems like its morality is found through experiences rather than it just being inherent or using deduction or intellect. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about this, bro.
So in reality, there is no such thing as maximal evil. There is only corrupted good. No matter how evil you might become, you will always be doing it in pursuit of things which are good. So there must be some base goodness for any being to be evil, and therefore, no way to be maximally evil, only corrupted good. As C.S. Lewis said, if dualism is true, then the bad power must be a being who likes badness for its own sake. But in reality, we have no experience of anyone liking badness just because it is bad. The nearest we can get to it is in cruelty. But in real life, people are cruel for one of two reasons. Either because they are sadists, that is because they have a sexual perversion, which makes cruelty a cause of sensual pleasure to them, or else for the sake of something they are going to get out of it, money or power or safety. But pleasure, money, power, and safety are all, as far as they go, good things. The badness consists in pursuing them by the wrong method, or in the wrong way, or too much. I do not mean, of course, that the people who do this are not desperately wicked. I do mean that wickedness, when you examine it, turns out to be the pursuit of some good in the wrong way. You can be good for the mere sake of goodness. You cannot be bad for the mere sake of badness. You can do a kind action when you are not feeling kind and when it gives you no pleasure, simply because kindness is right. But no one ever did a cruel action simply because cruelty is wrong, only because cruelty was pleasant or useful to him. In other words, badness cannot succeed even in being bad in the same way in which goodness is good. Goodness is, so to speak, itself. Badness is only spoiled goodness, and there must be something good first before it can be spoiled. Thus, there is no such thing as maximal evil, only corrupted or incomplete good beings. So logically speaking, there can be no such thing as maximal evil, and no maximally evil being, and therefore evil is contingent on good. Now some might still reject this idea of evil as a privation of good, but we can still make the argument another way using similar logic.
Okay.
Let's remember that a maximally great evil being has to be maximal in all its properties, which includes the properties of evil. So an evil god would be maximally unjust, cruel, sadistic, selfish, and in other similar ways. Now let's focus on maximal selfishness. Here is how this argument I found runs. Premise 1. Any maximally great being in any possible world would need to have all their characteristics to the logical maximum.
Okay. Yeah.
An evil maximally great being in any possible world would have selfishness to its maximal extent. An evil maximally great being in any possible world would not be willing to share anything at all, being maximally selfish and completely self-absorbed. An evil maximally great being in any possible world would be capable of not creating anything else. An evil maximally great being in any possible world would not have the will to create anything due to its supreme selfishness.
You're starting to lose me, bro. I don't know if these premises follow, but I also haven't thought it through 100%. Maximum selfishness. I want everything to myself. But if there's nothing, how can I have everything to myself? So hypothetically speaking, if this was creation and there was a God in the beginning of time before anything, and it was maximally selfish, and the God said, I want everything to myself, but there's nothing. Let me create everything so I can have it to myself. That seems logically consistent, but I might just be misunderstanding. So I don't necessarily think that a maximally selfish, we would have to understand, define what selfishness is. But does selfishness have to deal with vanity? Because I feel like that's two completely different things. I don't think being self-absorbed is 100% associated with selfishness. I feel like self-absorbed has everything to do with vanity, though. An evil, maximally great being in any possible world would be capable of not creating anything else. I'm not 100% sure that this is true, because to be maximally great, to be a maximally great being, to be an evil maximally great being, you would also have to be maximally logical. And so you wouldn't be able to, if you were maximally selfish, you wouldn't be able to, I don't think it would be possible to be selfish if you're the only being in existence. So you would end up having to create other beings to be selfish too, or to be cruel too. But they would also have to have some type of conscious component. So I don't think that logically speaking, an evil MGB would have to be also maximally logical, which means that they would have to create in order to be selfish, unless you can be selfish by yourself. But again, I don't know how that works. If I was the only human on Earth, how could I be selfish? Because I'm the only human. Or say, for example, I'm the only human on Earth and there's no animals. How could I be selfish? I'm genuinely asking. If somebody has an explanation in the comments, please let me know. But okay.
Great being in any possible world would not create anything. But see, this contradicts the very reality of our existence. We exist and a whole universe does. In fact, one could even argue a maximally selfish being could not even consider creating another being to share existence with, or even devote.
Okay. In this example, I can understand it slightly better because of sharing, because selfishness, you don't want to share anything. Okay. That's slightly easier to understand. Maximally selfish being could not even consider creating another being to share existence with. But then this also gets into like the competing properties of evilness. It's like a maximally selfish being that's also maximally cruel, but it also depends. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud. And so I'm not having like a million different trains of thoughts, but it also depends on how that selfishness manifests, because yes, it could 100% deal with sharing, but what if somebody was maximally selfish in its desire for pleasure? Because wouldn't that also be a part of maximally selfish? Would be selfish upon all aspects. And so I feel like we would have to define maximally selfish, because again, it would fall back into that issue of, if I have a desire to be selfish while also wanting to be maximally cruel, and I take pleasure from that, I don't find it unlikely for a deity to share parts of its existence or to share existence in order to accomplish another goal, if that makes sense. In order to accomplish maybe something that it prioritizes potentially more, like pleasure. But again, I'm not sure exactly how maximal qualities interact with one another. So that's something that is also interesting to think about. Like, what is the relationship between maximal selfishness and maximal cruelty?
Thoughts to
No
the
idea.
possibility of other beings. So therefore we reach something other than an evil God exists. Conclusion, therefore an evil God cannot logically exist.
I don't know how I feel about this
The very
syllogism.
definition of a maximally great evil being cannot even be sustained. But what if one objects that a maximally evil being could create some creatures in order to be even more evil? In other words, it would be more evil to create and allow creatures to experience good in order to rip it away from them. But logically, this would still be inconsistent with his selfishness. Such an evil being could never give anything else to another creature, since he would have to be maximally selfish in all possible ways. Now perhaps one could argue that an evil god has to lack maximal selfishness in order to maximize evil in terms of causing torture and suffering. But if an evil god has to require other beings in order to maximize his evilness, then such a being's properties are contingent on their being creatures, and therefore such a being cannot be necessary, and therefore cannot be maximally great. This would make such a being incompatible with contingency and ontological arguments, and therefore not more reasonable than the hypothesis there exists an omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect being. Remember, a maximally great being is one whose existence and properties are contingent on nothing. If the very properties of an evil maximally great being means he is contingent on other beings, then this hypothesis cannot be a competing hypothesis with the maximally great being of natural theology. Furthermore, natural theology contains the moral argument, which
Foundation of moral facts and duties. Who we would look to for moral guidance.
specifically argues for moral realism to a necessary personal source for
Premise 1. Morality is a rational enterprise. Moral realism is true, meaning moral facts and duties exist. Moral problems and disagreements among humans are too much for us to assume moral facts and duties are grounded in human source of rationality. Moral facts and duties are grounded in a necessary rational source.
the good. So
This source is what we call God.
logically follows from a posteriori argument, a maximally great being would have to be the good and therefore would be morally perfect, and not maximally evil. Now Stephen Law is aware of this fact, but his only objection is to raise the Euthyphro dilemma, which we've addressed elsewhere.
I'm actually interested to hear about the Euthyphro dilemma on this page.
Now perhaps one could say this challenge only is meant to address the teleological and cosmological arguments, but natural theology doesn't work by individual unconnected arguments, but together as a cumulative case, arguing for one maximally great being from different angles. If the cosmological argument posits a necessary being, the ontological argument posits a maximally great being, and the moral argument posits a necessary and personal source, then it is far more parsimonious to say we are simply talking about one maximally great being, instead of three different beings. It is just a logical conclusion when Occam's razor is invoked. So even if Law could demonstrate that a maximally great evil being was logically possible, the hypothesis would still not be more reasonable than the maximally great being given to us by the various arguments of natural theology, because of the implications of the moral argument.
It's a good thing that I never said maximally evil being. Mine is simply like, how do I illustrate this? We have God at the top, God, which is the uncaused causer. Now, we don't know the properties of this God. It's one thing, again, to say that there is a God, but it's another thing to say that that God is the Christian God. God. And then, like, these are three different claims, in my opinion. These are three different claims. So, what I'm trying to point out is that this right here could 100% be true. This right here could 100% be true, which is something that we've seen all throughout history. People oftentimes come up with a God or multiple gods. There could be an uncaused causer. I have no problem with that. But it's then when you start attributing divine attributes to this God, something that is supposed to be outside of human understanding. Now, I'm not saying that some of the arguments aren't logically coherent. I'm not saying that some of the arguments aren't good. But again, it comes down to an epistemic question of, okay, how do we know that this one is true over the other? And so, how do we know that from here, we go all the way down to here to the Christian God? How do we know that this God right here is true and real, while also the qualities that are associated with him are true and real, like morally perfect? Like morally perfect. What was the other ones that he was saying? Omniscient and omnipotent. Hold on. There's got to be a better way to do this. Nice. This is exactly how I wanted it. You know what I'm saying? Like, this right here is a different claim. Like, this right here, this God, simply the uncaused causer. And then even this is a different claim, right? Like, okay. So we start out with an uncaused causer. Okay, I grant you that the universe was created by the ultimate creator, by, I guess, what we associate with a God. But then you claim, okay, now that we got you to this point, the Christian God is the one and true God. Now you're kind of losing me here, because it's like, okay, how do you know that it's the one and true God as opposed to the Muslim God, as opposed to the Hindu God, as opposed to indigenous interpretations of a possible monotheistic God? Shit. Even even a Taoist interpretation of God. How do you know that this isn't the case for A, B, and C? That'd be one of my questions. Another question would then be, how do you know that God is morally perfect? That this God is morally perfect, omnipotent, omnipotent, and omniscient? Like, how do we know that? How can we confirm that? How can we verify that? Is that something that can be verified? And then you say, oh, well, like, what you have to do is you have to look to the Bible. That's assuming if I consider the Bible to be an authority. But then it comes up with a different claim. Like, okay, you refer back to the Bible, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna show you this, this, and this about the Bible. But then it's like, because the Bible is the inspired word of God. But then it's like, how do I know that the apostles were telling the truth? How do I know all of these other questions, bro? Like, all of the questions that are associated with the Bible. It's like, come on, bro. You're telling me that the Bible accounts for a deity like this? I just don't find that likely, bro. I don't know why. I just don't. I know that's a dogmatic assertion, but at the moment, I just don't find that likely right now. And on top of that, to claim that there is a being that is supposed to guide humans when we have outside of the Bible no real way to determine if the guidance that is being proposed is actually good, because then it ties into this. Humans ought to do certain because of this God. And so some of the certain things are like the 10 Commandments, but then also like, you're not allowed to have homosexual relationships. You're not allowed to have sex before marriage. You're not allowed to have, I'm forgetting some other ones. Like, I'm not saying that all of them are bad, but I think for me personally, like the what's it called? The homosexuality thing is like kind of big to me because it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, you're telling me we ask this question up here and then we get to this, and then somehow homosexuality is not a part of being morally perfect. It doesn't seem to correlate because it's just a sexuality. It has nothing to do with your character, in my opinion. And like, we're supposed to be looking up to this God that is supposedly morally perfect, and somehow not even just sex, not even just homosexuality, but like, my question is like, why is moral perfectness associated with like either a lack of sex, celibacy, or sex sex after marriage? Like, how is this like like morally perfect? It doesn't make sense to me when I look at like what sex has been throughout the history of humans, because I don't think that the only purpose of sex is to create a child. Like, I think that there's multiple other different purposes. One could be conflict resolution. One could be pleasure, just simply for pleasure. And it makes sense under the framework of, let's just go generally, evolution, that we are animals, and sometimes animals like to just do shit for pleasure. Not everything that we do for pleasure is a good thing, and that's where like ethics come in. And I do think that humans should have a sexual ethic, like not sexually assaulting people. But for this to be super, like a super big point, doesn't really make sense to me. It doesn't seem to correspond to what I think is morally perfect. But then people often claim that I'm trying to play God, which I don't care about being a God. Like, I really don't. I care about living a decent life. But anyways, this is just some of the stuff that I be thinking about. And then it's like, okay, if this right here is the standard, it's like, okay, morally perfect. Also applying to this, not just how do we know if God is morally perfect, but how do we know that he actually has these things? Like, it's one thing to be like, okay, like using the moral argument, we can see morals and goodness and things like that in the world. But it's like, okay, but how do we know that he's all powerful and not just a powerful being? How do we know that he's all knowing and not just like super knowledgeable being? So again, I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to be difficult through my exploration of potentially coming to Christ or potentially believing in a God, but these claims seem to be like human, like the example of like humans coming up with the idea of what an alien would look like, but then somebody saying like, well, those are human interpretations and a human's understanding of what an alien would look like, when in reality they would be looking completely different. That's exactly what I kind of think happens when we have conversations about God and certain interpretations about God. It's one thing to say God exists, even that claim, I don't know, but it's one thing to say that God exists and it's just an uncaused causer. Not associating any type of like human characteristics, not making it anthropomorphic, none of that. Just God is the uncaused causer. But then we get into this, and it's like, again, the Christian God, morally perfect, omnipotent, omniscient. Some instances will be able to fill up your water bottle. Some instances he will help you be able to find your keys. He has a will. He sent his son down here. Like, these types of like metaphysical claims are where I tend to be like, okay, back up. We're like, it feels like we're assuming a lot here. And I personally want to live in truth. And so I'm going to withhold judgment and actually decipher the truth claims that are associated with this. Now, my worldview can't account for everything. But anyways, yeah, that was an interesting video. Might do some more videos like this. Sorry if I was kind of hard to understand and if I was like yapping too much and I didn't articulate myself in the best way possible. Still working on it. But yeah, I'll catch y'all next time.